The noise hit Alex first, a dense, percussive wall of sound that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. He stood at the edge of the crowded room, a cold glass sweating in his hand, and watched the spectacle unfold. All around him, faces were illuminated not by the warm, low light of the lamps, but by the harsh blue glow of smartphone screens. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and ambition, every conversation a transaction of status and validation. He heard the words like a foreign language: algorithms, engagement rates, quarterly projections. Each person was a brand, performing a carefully curated version of success for an invisible, judging audience. His gaze drifted over his friends, their laughter a little too loud, their postures a little too practiced. They were a herd, he thought, the words surfacing from a deep, neglected part of his mind. Nietzsche's concept of the herd instinct, the fear of being apart from the crowd, the desperate need for the approval of the many. He saw it in the way they leaned into conversations, vying for the spotlight, their worth measured in likes and promotions. A profound sense of alienation washed over him, cold and clarifying. He was an observer here, a ghost at the feast, and the distance between himself and everyone else felt like an unbridgeable chasm. He found his friend Mark near the fireplace, holding court with a story about a recent business deal. Mark's eyes were bright with triumph, his gestures expansive. When he finished, he clapped Alex on the shoulder, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Alex, feeling the weight of his own silence, ventured a thought, a fragment of what had been circling in his mind all evening, a musing on the difference between a life lived for an audience and one lived for itself. He mentioned the philosopher's warning about the danger of losing oneself to the crowd. Mark's smile tightened. He waved a dismissive hand, the gesture slicing through the air between them. "You're overthinking it, Alex, always with the heavy stuff. Life's not that complicated. You hustle, you win, you enjoy the rewards." The words were casual, but their impact was seismic. They weren't just a dismissal of an idea. They were a dismissal of Alex's entire internal world, a rejection of the very thing that made him feel most alive. Something inside Alex snapped. The polite facade he had maintained for years crumbled in an instant. The heat of the room seemed to concentrate in his chest, rising to his face. He stepped closer, his voice low but vibrating with an intensity that made the people nearby fall silent. He spoke of the emptiness of their pursuits, the quiet desperation masked by noise. He declared that he could no longer participate in the charade, that he was leaving, not just the party, but the whole suffocating structure of their world. Mark stared back, his expression a mixture of confusion and contempt, and in that moment the last thread of their friendship frayed and broke. Alex did not wait for a reply. He turned and walked out, the roar of the party fading behind him like a receding tide. The cool night air was a shock, a baptism. He drove home through the neon-lit streets, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind eerily calm. In his apartment, he moved with a purpose he had not felt in years. He filled a single, worn backpack with practical essentials, clothes, a water filter, a knife. Then, from his nightstand, he retrieved his most essential provision, a weathered, dog-eared copy of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He ran his thumb over its embossed title, a promise and a challenge. Without a backward glance, he locked the door behind him and got back into his car. He drove away from the city's brilliant, artificial constellation, heading for the true darkness of the mountains, for a secluded cabin that represented not an escape, but a return. It was a break from the expectations that had shaped him, a first, terrifying step into a solitude he both feared and craved. The road ahead was black and empty, a perfect mirror of the uncharted territory within. The first few days were a baptism in quiet. The cabin was a small, sturdy structure of aged pine, smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. Alex woke with the sun, his body shedding the city's frantic rhythm like a heavy coat. At dawn, he would sit on the rough-hewn steps with a tin mug of black coffee, watching a family of deer step delicately from the tree line. They moved with a grace that felt like a rebuke to his former life, their large, liquid eyes holding no judgment, only a primal awareness. Their world was one of simple needs and immediate dangers, a stark contrast to the labyrinth of social anxieties he had left behind. At night, the sky was a revelation, a vast, black dome pierced by a billion points of cold, clear light. He would lie on his back in the cool grass, the immensity of the cosmos pressing down on him, making his old concerns about status and approval seem laughably small. In that grand silence, he felt a profound, if tenuous, peace. He began a journal, its blank pages an invitation. With a pen that felt clumsy in his hand, he started to transcribe the thoughts that had been whispers in the city's roar. He wrote of authenticity, of the freedom found in shedding the masks worn for others. He quoted Zarathustra, scrawling passages about the spirit becoming a camel, then a lion, and finally a child. He felt like the camel, burdened by the values of the herd, now kneeling in the desert to have them removed. The words flowed, a steady stream of clarity that felt like purification. For a week, the solitude was a balm, a sanctuary where his mind could finally stretch its limbs. But the silence, once a refuge, began to curdle. By the 8th day, the lack of human contact became a physical ache. He found himself talking aloud to the walls, just to hear a voice. The journal entries grew darker, the philosophical musings giving way to frantic, looping script. Intrusive thoughts, once held at bay by the noise of the world, now marched through his mind with impunity. They whispered that his quest was self-indulgent folly, that he had not escaped the herd but been cast out from it for his weakness. He was not a philosopher in the wilderness, but a failure in hiding. The weight of his own company became unbearable. Every flaw, every regret was magnified in the relentless quiet. He missed the mundane, the stupid, the human, a shared joke, a casual touch, the simple confirmation of his existence in another's eyes. The storm arrived on the 10th night, a violent, celestial fury that seemed to tear the world apart. Thunder detonated directly overhead, shaking the cabin to its foundations. Jagged forks of lightning illuminated the single room in stark, terrifying flashes, casting monstrous, leaping shadows. The wind howled like a damned soul, and rain hammered the roof in a deafening torrent. Huddled on his cot, Alex felt a raw, animal fear. This was not the gentle solitude of starlight. This was nature's brutal, indifferent power. The isolation was no longer philosophical. It was a cage. He was utterly alone, a fragile speck in a universe that could crush him without a thought. A primal scream built in his throat, a protest against the terror and the loneliness. He did not suppress it. He stood, stumbling to the door and throwing it open, confronting the chaos. The wind and rain lashed his face, and he stood there, shaking, letting the storm rage around him. In that moment of absolute confrontation, a strange calm descended. He realized the storm was not his enemy. It was simply a part of the world, a part of life, the peril that existed alongside the peace. To seek self-discovery was to invite both the serene dawn and the violent thunder. The struggle was not a sign of failure, but the very substance of the transformation. He was not here to find a permanent state of bliss, but to become strong enough to weather the storms, both outside and within. He stood there until the worst of the tempest passed, drenched and shivering, but with a newfound solidity in his core. As the thunder rumbled into the distance, the eastern horizon began to light. He watched the sun rise, the sky bleeding from deep indigo into soft hues of rose and gold. The wet world glittered, cleansed, and renewed. He felt the same. The loneliness was still there, a hollow space inside him, but it was no longer a void. It was a space he had chosen, a crucible. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, not as a flight from the world, but as a necessary descent into his own depths. The struggle was ongoing, a duality of peace and peril that he now accepted as the true path. He was not at the end of his journey, but he had finally truly begun.